Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, was a controversial member of the British royal family. Every detail of her life was scrutinised, and her private life was the subject of speculation. Princess Margaret was the second daughter of King George VI of the United Kingdom and Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, born Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. She had one sister, Queen Elizabeth II. Princess Margaret was born on the 21st of August 1930 at Glamis Castle in Scotland. When she was just 5 years old, her grandfather King George V died and her uncle became King Edward VIII. Before the year had ended, her uncle abdicated and her father became King George VI. The relative peace the family of four had experienced during Princess Margaret's early years was gone. They moved into Buckingham Palace from their modest home at 145 Piccadilly. To allow their daughters to meet girls their own age, the King and Queen created the first Buckingham Palace Brownie Pack, Girl Guides and Sea Rangers. Until her death, Princess Margaret was involved in these organisations. Princess Margaret was educated at home by her governess, Marion Crawford. Her education was not extensive, and later in life she felt she had not been adequately equipped to handle life. The family adored Crawford, or Crawfie as she was nicknamed by the family, and felt betrayed and outraged when she published a book about the princesses. During the Second World War, Princess Margaret and her family lived at Windsor Castle, which was deemed safer than London. The princesses led a somewhat normal life at Windsor during the war. At Christmas time, the girls staged pantomimes. In 1940, the princesses addressed the nation during a radio broadcast for the BBC's Children's Hour. During the war, Princess Margaret did not undertake any public or official duties. At the end of the war in 1945, Princess Margaret and her sister went incognito into the streets of London to celebrate. On the 1st of February 1947, Princess Margaret and her family went on a 3-month tour of southern Africa. Princess Margaret adored every minute of it. In November of that year, Princess Margaret was a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding. In her early adulthood, Princess Margaret enjoyed socializing and parties. She attended numerous parties and nightclubs with a group of friends known as the Margaret Set. The number of official engagements she undertook increased, and she was very popular with the public. Princess Margaret was connected with a number of different men, including the then Marquis of Blandford, King Michael I of Romania, and John Turner. As she reached her late 20s unmarried, the press hounded her incessantly, suspecting she may remain a spinster for life. In February 1952, Princess Margaret's father died, devastating his daughters and widowed wife. Her sister became the Queen of the United Kingdom, and Princess Margaret became a Councillor of State for her sister. Princess Margaret met Peter Townsend when she was 13 years old. Her parents were fond of Townsend, who was King George VI's equerry. Townsend was often with the family and was married, so gossip columns overlooked him as a potential suitor for the princess. In 1948, Townsend discovered his wife was being unfaithful to him, and they divorced in 1952. Princess Margaret began to depend on Townsend following the death of her father, and she turned to her religious faith as a way to cope. She was also prescribed sedatives by her doctor to help her sleep. It was around this time that she began a relationship with Townsend. In May 1953, Princess Margaret and her mother moved into Clarence House, while her sister and her family moved into Buckingham Palace. Townsend proposed to Princess Margaret in early 1953, and she accepted. They asked the Queen for permission to marry, but obstacles stood in their way. Townsend was 15 years older than Princess Margaret, and he was divorced. At the time, if a member of the British royal family married a divorced person, they could not be permitted to stay in the line of succession. The Queen asked them to wait a year while she prepared for her coronation. and so that they could have time to think it through. The relationship became public when Princess Margaret was photographed plucking fluff off Townsend's coat. The public were divided, with some for the relationship and some against it. Parliament were against the match, and the Queen was unable to give her consent for the marriage. Ultimately, Princess Margaret did not want to lose her status, position and wealth, and decided against marrying Townsend. She announced on the 31st of October 1955 her intentions to not marry Townsend. In 1956, Princess Margaret accepted a proposal from Billy Wallace, a close friend, but ended the engagement fairly soon afterwards. Princess Margaret met Anthony Armstrong Jones, a photographer, in 1958. They had a tumultuous relationship but became engaged on the 26th of February 1960. Little over 2 months later, they were wed on the 6th of May 1960. Their wedding was the first British royal wedding to be televised. Only one foreign royal attended the wedding, Queen Ingrid of Denmark, one of Margaret's godparents. It has been speculated that most other royals disapproved of the marriage between a princess and a commoner. They had a 6-week honeymoon aboard HMS Britannia before moving into apartment 10 of Kensington Palace. In 1961 they were created the Earl and Countess of Snowdon. They had initially turned down any titles, but as Princess Margaret was expecting her first child, she decided that it would be improper for the child of a princess to be born without a title. The couple had 2 children, David and Sarah, born in 1961 and 1964 respectively. In 1963, the couple moved into apartment 1A of Kensington Palace. They also owned a home on the island of Mustique. Princess Margaret often spent time on Mustique in the early 1970s. Princess Margaret and Anthony, or Tony as he was known in his family, had volatile rows and extramarital affairs. Princess Margaret's relationship with the much younger Roddy Llewellyn eventually ended the marriage. They were officially divorced on the 11th of July 1978. Princess Margaret continued to work for the British royal family well into the 1990s. Princess Margaret was plagued by ill health in her later years. She smoked heavily, having started in her late teens. In the 1970s, she was treated for depression. Later on, she suffered from migraines, laryngitis and bronchitis. In 1985, part of her left lung was removed, and in 1991 she gave up smoking, but continued to drink heavily. In 1993, Princess Margaret experienced a stroke, and the next year she scalded her feet, which affected her mobility. From then on she required assistance with walking and used a wheelchair occasionally. She had more strokes in March 2001. Her last public appearances were in August 2001 and December 2001 for the 101st birthday celebration of her mother and 100th birthday celebration of her aunt, Princess Alice. Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon, passed away on the 9th of February 2002. The previous day she had suffered a stroke which accompanied cardiac problems. Her funeral was held on the 15th of February 2002. Her body was cremated and her ashes were placed in the royal vault at St. George's Chapel. Her mother passed away only a few weeks later.